This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A very good morning to you. How many times in the last 7 months have we begun a conversation together about events in the Middle East, about events in Israel, and then subsequently, of course, in Gaza? And how many shifts have you felt in your understanding, perhaps even in your feelings, in your convictions over the course of that time? I think if we were to begin with things upon which we can all agree, not easy, I grant you, but I think we can all agree that for the last 3 months or so, international leaders from pretty much every corner of the planet have been calling upon Israel not to invade Rafah. Joe Biden said in March that it was a red line. And yesterday, Hamas accepted a deal negotiated, I think, by Egyptians, and celebrations unfolded on the streets of Gaza, on the streets of Rafah, where, remember, many of the people living in makeshift shelters and tents have already moved 3, 4, 5 times. I mean, the notion of home is a long distant memory for many of, almost all of these people. And then the order comes in to evacuate once again. And the invasion begins. So I heard it described by an American diplomat this morning called Dennis Ross, who has one of those CVs that you almost need a PhD in international relations to understand. He worked as a Middle East coordinator under Bill Clinton, a special advisor for the Persian Gulf to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He was the Director of Policy Planning in the State Department under George H.W. Bush, an ambassador, as I say, about Middle East expert. And he was talking this morning about 2 people. 3 people, actually, caught in a sort of triangle. He was talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. He was talking about Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right religious fanatic who sits in Netanyahu's government and who, along with another minister called Smotrich, has essentially had Netanyahu over a barrel since this iteration of his Israeli government began. And the third point of the triangle was Joe Biden. And what Dennis Ross explained, I felt incredibly powerfully this morning, was that Benjamin Netanyahu faced, or perhaps faces, singular, beg your pardon, present tense, a choice between those 2 people. He can either follow Itamar Ben-Gvir into invasion, into the situation that is currently unfolding in Rafah, or he can follow Joe Biden's instruction not to invade. Now, you might think it's too late for him to go with Joe Biden, but I read another analysis this morning, which I found very persuasive, and it suggested that Netanyahu, not for the first time, is trying to have his cake and eat it. He is doing enough in Rafah to say to the Israeli people, we stopped at nothing in our pursuit of military victory, but we are stopping now. And he doesn't actually want to recolonize the Gaza Strip as some of his more extremist allies do, or anything of that ilk. And I think that's probably true. But he does need to sort of play for a tiny little bit more time. When this government collapses, whether it's brought about by elections or by the desertion of those far-right religious extremists, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, Benjamin Netanyahu's liberty is in jeopardy. Not just his political future, his personal future, his criminal future. He could be on trial imminently once that government collapses. I'm not 110% across the domestic Israeli political situation, but that is certainly a very real danger for him, a very real prospect. And so it is against that backdrop that we read this morning about people believing that a ceasefire had finally been negotiated and Benjamin Netanyahu rejecting it. And that's the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. I find it helpful sometimes to refer to traditionally very right-wing British media in order to show you that this isn't an analysis that's coming from a place of leftism or objectivity or any sort of narrative or bias. Netanyahu rejects Hamas ceasefire. They describe it as a ruse after Gazans were seen celebrating in the streets of Rafah. The protests on the streets of Israel are driven largely by an increasing conviction that the hostages have been abandoned, that the welfare of the hostages was never really a priority for the man who was ultimately responsible for the security failures that caused or that allowed the October the 7th terror atrocity by Hamas in Israel. And that subsequent claims that everything he was doing were motivated by a desire to free the hostages have, in the minds of many, if not most of the families of the hostages, have crumbled to dust. So what you have now is a warning to 100,000 people to evacuate an eastern section of Rafah. I mean, you could speculate about whether they have anywhere else to go, but obviously they can go to other corners of the same city, a city that once I think had 270,000. I must get these numbers right, actually. The previous population of Rafah, I think, was 270,000. There's currently over 1 million internally displaced and refugees there as we speak. So they need to move to an area where they're less likely to get killed. And it's an operation that is unfolding despite very fierce and explicit opposition from Israel's key allies. Most senior politician, Jewish politician in America, Chuck Schumer, has already used the word pariah to describe Israel before this very deliberate decision to reject the importuning of Joe Biden and David Cameron and countless other international statesmen. They've gone into Rafah. We've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk, said John Kirby, the White House's national security spokesman. The narrative out of Israel is that the deal was suboptimal, that it wasn't something they could sign up to, that it wasn't necessarily something that was on the table, that they couldn't do it and they couldn't do this. And that is the conversation that Israel will be keen to see pursued in Western media, when, of course, the conversation that we have both a moral, never mind a political duty to conduct is the one about the offensive, the one about the attack upon Rafah against the express requests of Israel's biggest ally in the world, the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and, of course, the British government. So those two biggest allies, arguably, on the world stage have gone to the unprecedented lengths of saying, in specific terms, please don't do this. Please don't do this very specific thing. And I think if we were to be making a short list of things upon which we can all agree, that tension, that triangle with Joe Biden on one side, Itamar Ben-Gvir on the other, and Benjamin Netanyahu in the middle, the three Bs, if you like, Benjamin, Biden, Ben-Gvir, in a bind. He looks to have gone with Ben-Gvir. So he looks to have lent towards the far-right religious extremists upon whose support he relies for power. They have said that if he surrenders, as they have chosen to call it. This is the fellow who we were talking about last week, bringing up sort of Old Testament style language to talk about why the people currently living in the Gaza Strip should be shown little or no mercy. He has elected to go with the far right religious extremist upon whose support he relies for power. So that's, to me, and this might be simplistic, and this will probably be the basis of at least one of the questions that I'm about to ask you. He looks to me as a disinterested observer who has, since October the 7th, said to you that I refuse to mourn the killing of a Palestinian baby more or less than the killing of an Israeli baby. I refuse to. And at some point, there is a statistical imbalance that becomes morally unsustainable. For me, that point was passed some time ago. But we haven't finished yet, it would seem, this morning in particular. But it seems to me that Benjamin Netanyahu has sacrificed not just the blood of tens of thousands of Palestinian people, but he has managed, in the pursuit of an entirely self-interested goal, a goal of pure self-interest, he has managed to detach Israel from its key allies. This decision overnight, this specific incursion into invasion into Rafah, aid being cut off, people already facing starvation and disease, having what paltry aid could still make its way into the territory, cut off. Pictures of Israeli civilians over the course of the weekend, acting independently to stop aid heading from the Kingdom of Jordan towards Gaza, reaching its destination. And Netanyahu has elected to prioritise his own self-interest, because what will another invasion achieve that hasn't been achieved already, or that hasn't failed already? We must shoot some more missiles. We must kill some more people. Certainly not going to bring about the release of any hostages, because that was one of the things on the table in the deal that was rejected this morning. It also, according to reports, saw Hamas pledging, and you're perfectly entitled to suggest that any pledge from Hamas isn't worth the paper that it's printed on. You're entitled to suggest that, although, of course, it makes a mockery of international diplomacy if you sign up for that completely. They were pledging not to undertake any violent actions ever again, which frankly seems unlikely, but that is what has been rejected this morning. So he seems to me to have decided that clinging on to power is more important than clinging on to alliances with America, most obviously, the United States of America, most obviously, and then the UK, who are always there or thereabouts when these conversations unfold. That is what he has done, and he has done it solely to protect his own position. Because if he doesn't, if he pulled back, if he respected Joe Biden's requests, then Ben-Gvir and Smotrich would remove their support for his fragile coalition government, and he would be out of power and possibly facing all manner of personal legal problems. So there it is. I know I started slightly tongue-in-cheek, suggesting that we could make a short list of things upon which everybody could agree. I don't think I've said anything there that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. I certainly haven't expressed much of an opinion yet, except to quote Dennis Ross, the American ambassador, describing that jeopardy that Netanyahu has found himself in, and really compelled to choose either to go the way that Joe Biden wants him to go, or to go the way that Itamar Ben-Gvir has chosen to go. I also don't think that describing Ben-Gvir as a far-right religious extremist constitutes opinion or editorial. I think that is pretty much a matter of recorded fact. And I don't think that anyone can really dispute the observation that by going into Rafah this weekend, he has, at least for now, nailed his colours to Ben-Gvir's mast and ignored Joe Biden's. So what does this mean? That's the question this morning. We have been, I say we, I'm sounding like the late Queen, but we have been stunned in recent months by the quality of contribution to this programme. I genuinely believe that some of the callers to this programme have demonstrated a better grasp of the facts of the matter than some of the professional, quotes, booked, end quotes, guests on other broadcast platforms. I have learned so much from you and have tried very hard to walk that tightrope between here's Marcus saying, James, you're a terrorist sympathiser spreading your pro-jihad, pro-caliphate propaganda narrative to suit to your majority Islamic jihad audience. That's from Marcus. That came in at 10:14 this morning, and after the next break I'll find a couple accusing me of being an intolerable Israeli shill. So that's the tightrope I walk, I think, rather expertly, if you'd allow me a quiet moment of immodesty, but only because of the quality of the calls that you make to the programme, giving me the facts and the understanding, the opinions and the ideas that I need to assemble a form of consensus. And today that consensus is this. Benjamin Netanyahu has chosen Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right religious extremist, over Joe Biden, the president of a country that has offered so much support to Israel over the years that many Americans remain deeply, deeply unhappy with Joe Biden. It's an electoral issue from the other end of the spectrum. So what does this mean now? The decision to go into Rafah, the decision to ignore Joe Biden's requests, the decision to, well, as the White House national security spokesman said, we've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. And they've gone in. Partly because people like Ben-Gvir don't believe in the notion, the concept, or the existence of an innocent Palestinian in Gaza. So what does this mean now? this decision, not just the military decision, not just the logistical decision, but crucially the political and moral decision to say to Joe Biden, nah, sorry, mate, you can jog on. I'm keeping the far-right religious extremists in my cabinet suite because if I don't keep them sweet, my own personal position could be in jeopardy. What does this mean? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. This escalation, but crucially, this decision to favour the religious fanatics in his own cabinet over President Biden and everybody else who's called upon him not to go into Rafah. What does that mean?
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time, and the question is relatively straightforward, although the context, of course, is about as confused and as complicated as it's possible to imagine. But Benjamin Netanyahu has elected to ignore his allies, most obviously Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America, and to cross a red line, as Biden described it in March, by invading Rafah. He has been told by many Western politicians that would be unacceptable, but he has done it anyway. So what does this mean? 600,000 estimated Palestinian children in Rafah at the moment. Starvation, disease, dehydration already on their horizons, if not already here. And a few hours they were granted to get 100,000 people out of an already overcrowded and unsafe locale. So what does this latest escalation mean? 22 minutes after 10 is the time, and the number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973. And it is, I suppose, an examination today of Netanyahu in particular. I know it's sometimes hard to separate a leader from a country or a kind of, you speak about a government as if it is a country, and I don't know how helpful that is. But let's actually quickly listen to what Dennis Ross had to say, that ambassador that I was referring to just a moment, because I think this is, for me at least, this was a little bit like a shaft of light coming into the grim tidings from Gaza over the course of the weekend.
The Messianic nationalists in his government, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, have made it clear they regarded what the terms that Israel was prepared to put on the table, Smotrich called a surrender deal. I do think that Netanyahu is in a difficult position because if in fact those terms end up being maybe not exactly what is agreed to, but you end up with something that is a variation of it, the public in Israel is going to say, look, we need to accept this because we need to get hostages out. There's part of his government that's threatening to leave. I think at a certain point, he needs to choose Biden over Ben-Gvir. He needs to choose the hostages over Smotrich.
There it is. He needs to choose Biden over Ben-Gvir. He needs to choose the hostages over Smotrich. And just to complicate things even further, just before I came on air, I read some reports that the Hamas promise to return 33 hostages didn't specify or didn't accommodate a distinction between the living and the dead. So I widely believe that many hostages will have died, but that Hamas offer, that Hamas acceptance, as far as I can tell at the moment, does not distinguish between living and dead hostages. So what happens? What does this mean today? Hassan's in Forest Hill. Hassan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's never been about October the 7th, but the agenda has always been to take over Gaza. And why? Because there's gas oil fields there, there's oil there, and he wants to create a canal, the Ben-Gvir canal, not Ben-Gvir, a canal through. And that's why he hasn't really cared about the Israeli captives, and hence the blanket bombing.
So I think a couple of things you've said maybe work. Obviously, you're pretty close to a conspiracy theory here with the idea of a canal being built or the natural resources underneath the soil of the Gaza Strip being what Benjamin Netanyahu has really got his eyes on. And respectfully, the question I'm asking today is what does the invasion of Rafah change? So if you start from a position of believing something unprovable and slightly conspiratorial, Hassan, you can't really answer the next question, can you? Nothing changes because you already believe something unprovable and you are now going to continue to believe it.
Well, I think when I ask myself why is he doing this? Why is he not caring about his own people, the Israeli captives? Why is he doing the blanket bombing? And I think when you think deeper, you can actually see his motive, and that's to take over Gaza.
You can see that if you want to, or you can see a man just described by Dennis Ross as being caught, if you like, between the Scylla and Charybdis of Joe Biden and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the Justice Minister. And in order to keep his own government intact, he has to I almost wonder why I bothered playing that clip, mate, to be honest with you. It makes it pretty clear that in order to keep that coalition together, he has to continue on the path of war, because anything less than that would be, in the minds of these people, these crucial allies of his, it would be surrender. Omar is in Croydon. Omar, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I just wanted to say that when October 7th happened, myself and many others, we were obviously very devastated with what happened. But just a few days later, we were all also really scared. And we were scared because we've, seen the brutality and the extent to which the Israeli government responds to these kind of things. A lot of Western allies and a lot of the international community wanted to give Israel the benefit of the doubt numerous times. But yesterday that's been proven otherwise. It was Hamas that accepted the ceasefire deal, and they moved into Rafah anyways. And for a lot of us,
there's room for some there's a need for some nuance here. It was a ceasefire deal, the terms of which weren't immediately clear. As I've just said to you, in the last few hours, it's become possible, if not it has been reported that it didn't distinguish between dead and living hostages, for example, which obviously for the families hoping to be reunited with their loved ones is going to be an absolutely crucial platform. And, the timing of it came after the announcement to evacuate Rafah, to evacuate parts of Rafah. So I don't think it's fair for me or you to present it as quite as black and white as perhaps you just did. It wasn't, here is a ceasefire offer, here is a peace deal that you would be mad not to accept, and then you haven't accepted it. It's a little bit more complicated than that, Omar.
Yes, of course. But if the motivation is to get hostages out, then surely if the ceasefire deal isn't satisfactory enough, you renegotiate. And you don't go into the red line, as was described by Joe Biden. And I really hope that Western allies actually stop giving the benefit of the doubt and actually do something about it. Some weapons embargo, something,
Sanctions, something more than what we've seen sanctions. Already.
Otherwise,
Otherwise, what's the red line? This is what I want to do today, actually, Omar. Thank you. I really want to zone in on that triangle of tension and that use of phrases like red line. What is the point of diplomatic missions to your allies if they completely ignore you, which is absolutely what Benjamin Netanyahu has done. So what does that mean? Absent the theoretical responses you described, calling for more meaningful action. It's they just signed off last week another massive tranche of financial aid. So it seems unlikely to me that tap's going to be turned off. Do you think Netanyahu is gambling that Joe Biden can say what he wants, but he can't do anything?
The feeling that domestic politics are so strong in this situation that it doesn't, that maybe Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't really care what the U.S. government, or maybe, and this is my earlier point, maybe you're right. He's calling the bluff because he thinks that he's been let go and he's been, given that benefit of the doubt so many times. And I'm afraid, and many of us are afraid, that it's going to be a similar situation now. There aren't going to be any sanctions. There's just going to be, as it's called, BB hugging,
Yes, I haven't heard that phrase before, but it'll be interesting to see whether other callers think that some of that goodwill, that historic support, has now been hemorrhaged. Certainly, Chuck Schumer's recent comments seem to suggest that there's a strong school of thought in Washington, D.C. that would sign up to that idea. My worry, and this is what I mean by the tightrope, my worry as someone who recognises the need for a modern state of Israel, but also recognises the necessity and probably the inevitability of a two-state solution to this crisis. My worry is that Israel has isolated itself in a way that I have never seen before. I'm not a Middle Eastern expert, but I've been having conversations about it for 20 years on this radio station, and I've been educated over that time by many, many people. but I don't think Israel has ever looked quite as isolated as it looks now. And it looks more isolated today than it did on Friday when we wished each other well for the weekend. That's something we can add to the conversation. Is it true? Is Israel now more isolated than ever before? You're going to struggle to refute that. You're going to struggle to say, no, it's perfectly normal to completely ignore the express wishes of the American government. And if Israel is more isolated than ever before, what on earth does that mean? What would a new government have to do in order to rebuild some of the bonds of trust, if you like, that Benjamin Netanyahu appears to have sacrificed upon the altar of appeasing religious extremists, fanatics, terrorists? Is again an accurate description, not a matter of opinion, in his own cabinet. 10:31 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. I also wonder whether or not we have been a little bit let down by our media over here. These two names that I keep bandying around, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, moving front and centre, partly as a consequence of that explanation from Ambassador Ross, from Dennis Ross, about Netanyahu being caught really between the Joe Biden on the one hand and Itamar Ben-Gvir on the other, the Smotrich and Gvir faction, if you like, propping up Netanyahu's government. The government will fall if they leave, and they see any stepping back from military engagement, any failure to invade Rafah, as surrender. I wonder if we understand that properly. I hope you do if you've been listening to this programme. But, phrases like religious extremist or fanatic or even terrorist, I think Ben-Gvir's conviction was for incitement to racism in about 2007. But the other fella, Smotrich, described by a former deputy chief of Shin Bet itself, that's the Israeli security service, he described him as a Jewish terrorist who planned to blow up cars on a major highway during the 2005 Gaza disengagement. He wasn't convicted, and he denies it himself. But that's a former deputy head of the Israeli security services talking about one of the men who is now essentially forcing Netanyahu's hand. So where that hand goes for Netanyahu, for Israel, is a question that we're trying to answer today. Farah is in Southfields. Farah, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for having me on again.
You're very welcome.
All I was going to say is that I think the reason why Netanyahu is ignoring Biden is that he doesn't believe Biden's going to win. He's counting on Trump coming in November. If you look at the rhetoric that Trump's come out with, it's very much saying to Netanyahu, get it done, get it done, get it done. So,
Trump's got quite a lot on his plate at the moment. He could be in jail by the end of the week from the most recent events in the New York court. He continues with his contempt. But I don't know.
He could still be elected.
No, of course he could, even if he's in
So,
prison. But I don't. I'm not poo-pooing what you're saying. I'm surprised, is all, because I haven't seen Trump as having a particular influence over recent events at all. Even if, because I don't think Netanyahu will be. He'll be there when the next American presidential election is completed.
I think Netanyahu doesn't know. Quite frankly, he doesn't know what's going on right now. So I think he is banking on Biden going out, Trump coming in, and giving him the support that he showed last time. And also, so that's the reason why he's leaning. Well, not leaning, he's right in the lap of these, extremists, as you said, because he's trying to hold on to power for as long as he can. Because what is the alternative? Once he's not prime minister, he's, at least in court for, and, never mind war crimes.
All I would do is qualify. When you said he thinks that Trump is going to be president, I would just swap out that word for hopes, and then I'd have no problem at all with your analysis.
Yes,
I think he's just because it's a slightly desperate roll of the dice. His entire career is peppered with examples of putting off big decisions until the last possible moment, even to the point where it's not even a decision anymore. Events have sort of determined what he would have to do, so he puts off deciding which way to jump until he's pushed inexorably one way or the other. And this in terms of the American president, well, I can't not go into Rafah because then my own government collapses, my own position becomes untenable. I don't really want to lose the support of Joe Biden, but hey, who knows? Maybe Trump will be back in the White House by Christmas.
Yeah, but I think he also knows that he's not going to lose the full support of any American president. As you said earlier, just a few minutes ago, they've signed off more aid. There's a law going through.
Peace. He needs peace. Biden needs peace, whether it's permanent, which is almost impossible, or temporary, which is at least plausible. He needs it. It's going to start. It already is eating into his election prospects in America. So, oddly, talk about it being an issue of domestic politics, even though it's also an issue of epic international importance. It's domestic politics in America and domestic politics in Israel. And Biden's self-interest can't be written out of the equation either. The simple calculation by Democrats that they will hemorrhage support. Labour has what is being loosely described as a Muslim problem over its Gaza policies and its Gaza approach. It is as nothing compared to the problems Biden could have if the current trajectory continues. Farah, thank you. Hafsa's in Dubai. Hafsa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. I just kind of wanted to expand the conversation and sort of say, regardless of what people's feelings are about why this war in Gaza is happening in response or not, or continuing or not, the prolonging of this war has always been about the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem, to allow for the continued march to militarily occupy, cut off, and prevent any kind of pathway towards any kind of final settlement that would achieve statehood. And regardless of being more extreme in terms of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, Netanyahu is brought up to that idea, be it in terms of cutting off the entirety of surrounding cities around and towards Ramallah, or about the Aqsa compound and allowing for the slow occupation of the Aqsa compound and the takeover of the Aqsa compound. And whether we like it or not, we have to acknowledge that President Biden is ideologically supportive of preventing the self-determination of the Palestinian people, or else he would have used, along with his National Security Council members and other members of administration, a number of significant leverage points that the US government and Congress has at its disposal to pressure conditioning aid, preventing aid. It's not even about new laws. We have the Leahy laws. We have special Leahy laws.
You just can't quite leap, I don't think, from A to B there. You can't say that the failure... you can make a case, but you can't state definitively that it proves that Biden is sort of tacitly supportive of what you're describing. I mean, that's what diplomacy is, isn't it? Is trying to find compromises, trying to find wriggle room. I think it's a little bit binary to say that because he hasn't done some of the things that he might have done, he must therefore be fully supportive of the people that he's publicly trying to stop.
I think that's something that we could have debated 4 or 5 months ago. I think now that we're 7 months into this and continuously seeing... but then why would he talk about... No, I'm not comfortable with the idea that he's publicly espousing one line while privately pursuing the opposite. I know that politics is the art of the possible, and I know that I'll probably get arrested for naivety for saying so, but I think Joe Biden passionately hoped that Netanyahu would not go into Rafah. I think
for a whole heap of reasons, some of them selfish, but also humanitarian.
That can be argued. I think that for myself and a number of experts who have worked in this region and on this conflict for so many years are able to identify U.S. administration policies when it comes to being able to exert pressure privately or publicly.
And failing to do so. So why talk about a red line then?
Well, the same reason Obama talked about a red line on Syria and never went into Syria in 2013. It's the same idea of trying to put pressure and then actually doing nothing. President Biden has
because they hope that the pressure will work. They hope that the pressure will work. That's the only bit I'm quibbling with you about, is that they do hope that the pressure will work.
Splitting hairs.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think it's healthier than having sort of secret hidden agendas on the table.
I'm not saying there's a hidden agenda. I'm saying that, certainly in my 15 years of working on this region, including on this conflict, and working with various U.S. administrations and a number of officials from the top echelons of the National Security Council and Department of Defense to the State Department and other parts, there is something inherently different about how this U.S. administration is taking to task Israel versus previous ones, including Donald Trump's, despite the fact that we've had the movement to Jerusalem and others based on different members and officials that are in the administration. The point being is that there is ample evidence of human rights abuses that would force the U.S. to use laws on the books to condition portions of military aid. Instead, the Biden administration puts $15 billion of fresh aid on top of the $3 billion they get annually anyways, ignoring all reports. We know that the Secretary
while
of
at the
State
same
has
time espousing the importance of red lines, which you remind us history suggests may not be worth the paper they're written on. Briefly, if you would. How significant then are the events of this weekend? And I'd like, if I may, to steer your attention away from the West Bank and back to Gaza, just in the specifics of the military engagement in Gaza, Rafah.
James, I'm half Egyptian, so this is something that goes way beyond just the politics of the Strip. This is about the Arab states, peace treaties, the alliances and borders. This signals, in my personal opinion, that there is a very deep and dark revenge agenda in this Israeli government that I cannot say Prime Minister Netanyahu is hostage to, of continuing to push Palestinians to the brink of certain death, either be it to force a mass displacement event into the Sinai Peninsula, endorsing extremist rhetoric that Sinai is Gaza, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, and continue and reducing the population to such a size that the Israeli military can continue their occupation militarily indefinitely, prevent the label of apartheid because it requires a civilian administration, and effectively entirely take back the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territories.
And I wonder at what point that conversation begins to unfold in public, between statesmen and women, when somebody in the room where it happens actually starts introducing that more effectively into the discourse. I'm just going to introduce you to my world, if I may, Hafsa, while you've been talking. At 10:43 and 10:44, two texts came in. Paige writes, as an American, this woman is offending me. And Sharina writes, I 100% agree with this woman. Make of that what you will. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A little bit, but minor pushback, or maybe not that minor, from Julius to the last caller, to Hafsa. Writing, Obama didn't go into Syria because the Republican Congress refused to sign off on new military authorization, leaving him susceptible to being accused of lawless military adventurism by those same people. And here, of course, it was Ed Miliband, I think, who led the rejection of David Cameron's desire to get stuck in, for want of a better word, in Syria. 10:49 is the time. Benjamin Netanyahu has invaded Rafah, despite Joe Biden asking him not to, and indeed describing a decision to do so as crossing a red line. At the same time, Hamas have accepted a ceasefire deal negotiated in Egypt, but Benjamin Netanyahu's office states that it would appear to be a ruse intended to make Israel look like the side refusing a deal. Nonetheless, Israel are the side refusing a deal, albeit that the deal may not genuinely have been something they could sign up for in good faith. And the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is widely perceived as having Benjamin Netanyahu's, I need a figure of speech that's a little less schoolyard, but he's got him by the short and curlies, if you like. He's called for Israel to occupy Rafah immediately, adding that military pressure must be increased until the complete defeat of Hamas and its absolute surrender. So, if the current direction of travel leads you, like me, to the conclusion that at the moment Netanyahu is leaning much more towards Ben-Gvir than towards Biden, what does that mean? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to join in. Messianic extremist was a great way, wasn't it, of describing Ben-Gvir, and that was Dennis Ross, an American diplomat who's worked across both parties. He's worked under, I think he was in Jimmy Carter's administration, would you believe, but he has latterly worked for George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, and for Bill Clinton. And it was an interview he gave that really caught my eye this morning and really crystallized that simple distinction between going the way Biden wants or going the way Ben-Gvir wants. And I would cautiously suggest, I normally have a lot of people listening in Israel, so perhaps if you are one of them, you can respond to this. I suspect that most people in Israel who are clearly not on the same page as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir politically or religiously would rather have seen Netanyahu lean in a little bit closer to Biden than to Ben-Gvir. But I could be wrong. And of course, I haven't got polling in front of me. Polling generally shows support for the war, but not support for Netanyahu. So make of that what you will. And while we're talking about how confusing it is sometimes to get a proper picture, then I should have added sooner, that the Israeli cabinet voted this weekend to ban Al Jazeera from the country. One of the few international news organisations that's really managed to get proper footage, proper reportage out of Gaza. British news organisations, the BBC, Channel 4 News, ITN, Sky News, can't really get in. Israel won't let them in. So the decision to ban Al Jazeera adds to that narrative of opacity, doesn't it? If you know that old line that politicians like to use, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Why won't you let journalists in? 10:52 is the time. Luma is in Orpington. Luma, what would you like to say?
So, James, it's two things. Netanyahu, unfortunately, if you think of the day before October 6th, was facing everything from fraud to corruption to charges, to say a few. He's and this is not local. He's not on the positive side internally. If you think of also what he was trying to do with the judiciary, with changing the constitution. So bizarrely as it may seem, what happened over the last 7 months has been a bit of a lifeline to him, because he was able to.
I think you may have missed the first 10 minutes of analysis on this programme this morning, Luma, because you are steering us back to territory we've already explored.
No, but that's not the point. I think the conclusion of that is that he has absolutely zero motivation to not play, unfortunately, to the darker, harder side of his party whatsoever, because neither Biden or anyone else will be able to give him any kind of immunity from his own judiciary, basically. And he will know he will be out of government and into jail is the only end point when the war stops for him. What does that mean from a Biden point of view? Could not have happened in a worse time with election year coming. Biden, while has red lines, is a weak president. He sits over a divided Congress and Senate, and he will be losing even more votes as long as this continues. So I don't think he's able to force his red line, but he is also. I don't imagine he'll lose the election. I think the gap is too far from him and Trump point of view, but he will end up with even a more divided Congress potentially, especially if you think of some of the states like Michigan, some of the other key states, basically, which are probably going to go opposite direction because of the Arab Muslim votes there. So that's why Biden is going to equally be increasingly desperate to try to get an end to this before we hit into full campaign trail.
This is that's brilliant. Actually, I just felt one of the clouds disappear. So why? How can Biden simultaneously talk about red lines and sign off on the aid deal? Because he needs to keep Netanyahu on side in order to persuade Netanyahu not to do the things that he doesn't want him to do. But Netanyahu is doing them. So what can Biden do next? Because on the one hand, you've got this apparently meaningless red line, but on the other, you have, I think, the explicit need, whether it's for humanitarian or personal electoral reasons, an explicit need to rein Netanyahu in.
I think what will happen is that, and there was an interesting in the U.S. In the White House briefing when the U.S. Spokesperson was very clear around, I'm not going to say anything that will jeopardize the negotiation, is that they might actually skip Netanyahu and try to work around his government, because in the end there would be enough people in the Israeli government, not in the cabinet, who realize that actually you can only go so far. The ethos of the sand hour, I don't know if you know this, the Israeli army has this approach where they go as far as they can with a shorter period of time before the sand runs out, and that's when the international outcry kind of calls out. That has been their approach for all their conflict. I think they're now realizing that even with everything going on the backdrop of a U.S. election that will probably lose or cost the presidency or cost a lame duck president, that the US are also not going to allow them to continue. I think the other thing we just also need to think, because same here in the UK, as you said, we've seen this replaying in the local election, probably will replay. No one wants this to continue. But I think in the UK, where I can vote, I would say if we are able to stop military aid and even arms, like cancel or suspend weapon licenses, that whoever does that will have my vote.
Yes, and there'll be a lot of people in that category, and the complete. I know you're not doing this, but. And I used a phrase earlier that the Muslim vote, there'll be plenty of people who aren't Muslim or indeed remotely religious who would also be very supportive of more robust steps to protect Palestinian civilians from the continuing Israeli onslaught. I hope you find it. Thank you, Luma. That was very helpful for me, at least. I hope you find it helpful when I occasionally show you what it's like in my inbox, because I do want you to fully understand how difficult it is for me and all my colleagues to conduct these conversations, especially those of us who are determined to do so openly and honestly. So Mohit's been in touch. He says, Al Jazeera was shut down in Israel due to low viewership. The Israeli government had nothing to do with it. To suggest that the Israeli government would ever hinder or obstruct journalists is anti-Semitic. Don't fall victim to this toxic anti-Semitic trope. Mohit, it was a vote in cabinet. It was a unanimous vote in cabinet to shut down Al Jazeera on Sunday. It was literally 2 days ago. Benjamin Netanyahu literally announced it on Twitter. Shlomo Karhi, the communications minister, literally published footage showing Israeli authorities raiding the Al Jazeera office in East Jerusalem and confiscating the channel's equipment. So, there's no laws against being stupid, but it would have taken you about 1 second to find out the facts on that. And I read it out because I like to highlight how determined some people are to be stupid, to believe things that are simply not true. Lee is in Newport. Lee, actually, I haven't got time. I may come to you. Ooh, who knows? Are we going to continue with this conversation, possibly introduce a new angle, a new dimension to it, or are we going to do something completely different after the 11 o'clock news? At this moment in time, nobody knows. Because I'm presenting the programme, Eleanor is producing it, and we haven't decided yet. So there's no earthly way. Keith is also here. There is no earthly way that anybody could possibly know what we're going to do next, because we don't. You'll have to find out, won't you, shortly. You are, however, listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and some of the other stories that have caught my eye this morning include the first ever successful prosecution of a serial burglar, and that's probably a more helpful term than shoplifter, although that's what constitutes much of his criminality, by a private police force. That conjures up all sorts of questions.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. I wonder whether this is relevant. Well, I know it's relevant to the last call, actually, and the problems that the Labour Party faces in this field. Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham both won elections, big victories in areas with large Muslim populations. And Miqdad Versi writes very persuasively in The Guardian yesterday about how that was achieved by engaging with citizens. And I think the implicit criticism is that Keir Starmer is not doing that. So I think we may move into that space about, I don't want to call it the Muslim vote, albeit that there is a campaign, a grassroots Muslim campaign, making various demands of Sir Keir Starmer this morning in order to win back lost votes over Gaza. But I know from my inbox that there are plenty of people who are neither Muslim nor remotely religious who also feel that their traditional support for the Labour Party is being compromised and threatened by the position that Starmer has adopted. Listen, if you were to be generous, you'd simply say there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of clear blue water between between the two major parties on this specific issue. So let's see whether or not we want to move into that space. But I continue with this conversation about what this means now, this invasion of Rafah. What does it mean? Apart from the obvious, it means more suffering and probable death for innocent Palestinian civilians. And, of course, what does that mean for the wider world, for the wider context? Lee's in Newport. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on your show. And I won't talk over you this time. I'll have a little solid debate. Just quickly, seen your interview with Bassem Youssef the other day, and I thought that was fantastic as well.
Thank you. That's on full disclosure. He's an amazing guy, isn't he?
He is as well. I think there's a bit of banter, because us Welshmen love a bit of banter. Your trainers have seen a bit of life, haven't they?
I'm not built for visual media. I'm at home on the radio, and they film the podcast. It wasn't supposed to be filmed. It's supposed to go out just as audio. But as long as you don't get onto my posture, Lee, then I'm happy to take a few. No. I've taken a few hits for my trainers, but I look like Baloo the bear in some of those. I don't even know.
He's got some guns on him, though, hasn't he? Bassem as well.
He's very smooth. He reminded me a bit of Robin Williams, his sort of manner and his energy levels, and he's very, I believe, what the kids call buff. But I saw him live at the Hammersmith Apollo last couple of weekends ago, and it's an absolutely brilliant show.
Oh, right.
Anyway, where were we?
So, right. I'm basically a white person, white Christian male, and you are right when you're saying about the Muslim vote, so on. But I know you don't want to go into that for later, but you're 100% right on that. Just quickly, right? And I'm not going to be voting in this election. Okay. Now, quickly back to the war that's going on. And guys, I failed my GCSEs when I was a kid. Nothing to be proud of. I took them again and passed them on a second time. Now, I've known this about Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben Gvir and Smotrich before October the 7th. If you follow politics, which I do, I like my history and stuff like that, sure. The elections in Israel have failed. I think they had 4 elections in 5 years because they couldn't.
That's not quite. I mean, it's always going to be a coalition, but Netanyahu's desperation to cobble together another coalition is an inevitable part of their electoral system. But that's how people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich end up in the room where it happens.
Well, exactly, and you could lose some similarities to the United Kingdom and Brexit, and the Conservative and the Brexit Party. You could put some similarities within that.
You could. I'm not sure. Let me push you towards the point you rang in to make.
Yeah. Right. So basically, what I'm saying is, right, this was known well before. Now, if I failed my GCSEs, right,
this is a final warning for procrastination and distraction and going off at tangents. What do you think has changed as a consequence of Netanyahu going into Rafah this weekend?
The change basically is for the Palestinian people, hasn't it? Really, hasn't been much change. They're facing being wiped off the map, really. That's all you can
yes. I mean, in fact, helpfully for your point, Ben Gvir gave an interview to Channel 12 in Israel last Wednesday in which he said that he believes Israel needs to occupy Gaza and stay there, and that they would develop a, quotes, plan of encouragement, end quotes, to make Palestinians leave. God forbid that we're sitting here in 2 or 3 months' time and Joe Biden has been ignored even more completely by Benjamin Netanyahu, and the desires of people like Itamar Ben-Gvir have been even more completely indulged by Benjamin Netanyahu. And we are talking about a situation where Gaza has been occupied and a plan of encouragement. That's a frightening phrase there. Nearly swore. That is a really frightening phrase, isn't it? A plan of encouragement to make Palestinians leave. Just think about that for a minute. So it's an illegal occupation coupled with a, quotes, plan of encouragement, end quotes, to make people leave. I'll just let that resonate with you for a minute. Lee, take care. Imtiaz is in Bradford. Imtiaz, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm just going to look. I've listened to a lot of, good people online, and what you're talking about, what's happened on the weekend, it's shocking, very shocking, because to say that there's nothing left. First of all, there's nothing. I mean, let's literally say nothing left, no infrastructure, no education, no healthcare, nothing. Everything's been obliterated, nothing left, no life for the children, no life for the women. There's nothing. There's no livelihood left in Gaza. So what else do you want from Gaza now? Yeah. You've got Netanyahu now on the other side. He's being pressured by psychotic fascists. Okay, who can't. This is really shocking, because I was watching Al Jazeera, and you look at the Gaza children, and they're there playing on the beach, and they're in the water, and they've got their dinghies, and you've got the fascists saying they're not allowed to do that. They can't possibly live like that. You're covering a lot. You're covering a lot of ground, and for people listening, it's not immediately clear. You're referring to people saying things in Gaza can't be that bad because here's some footage of some children on a beach. Yeah. So yes. No. What I'm trying to say is, for
well, at least we're both confused, Imtiaz.
I'm not. No. What I'm trying to say is,
go on then.
These children, you remember, Gaza is on. You're talking about where it is and where
Imtiaz, mate. So just take a breath, all right? I've got absolutely no idea what you're telling me, and I know that you had an interesting point to make when you came on, and sometimes we all get a bit nervous in the moment. But if you want to just put it in a couple of sentences in answer to the question, what's changed this weekend?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is what's changed this weekend is that the fact that the Gazans are not allowed to live.
Well, that hasn't changed, has it?
Life.
Just further confirmation, if you like, that they have been essentially dehumanised. And in fact, mate, it's worse than perhaps we realised when you rang in, because that little interview there with Ben Gvir on Channel 12 on Wednesday, talking about the need to occupy Gaza and stay there, and then to get the Palestinians to leave. I'm afraid that is a member of the cabinet, not a member of the war cabinet, but it's a member of the Israeli cabinet, essentially saying out loud what I might once have accused callers of making up or being a little bit excessive or conspiratorial. I mean, it's there. Kieran's in Cork, in Ireland. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you? I just wanted to say, well, two main points. But basically, I wanted to say that all this does, and it's a follow-on from the previous caller there, all this does is it pushes into further contrast the principles that of human rights, international law, democracy, blah, 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 that all governments purport to hold, and their actions. That's all it does. I mean, why are we going into the machinations of Gvir, Netanyahu, Gallant, and all these kind of the internal domestic machinations?
In order to understand what's happening, no?
I understand, but but we can go too far, because
you're right.
Basically, this is their responsibility. I'm not an Israeli citizen. They're driving the car. I mean, if I stopped you on the road and you were drunk driving, and you had all your family in the car, and I went, and you started saying, well, they were doing this and blah, 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 I'd say, but you're in control of the car. That'd be it if I was a guard.
No, but this is, I mean, I'm a big fan of analogies, Kieran, but sometimes I don't know if they do quite as much work as we want them to. I mean, you're kind of negating the necessity of international relations and diplomacy itself. The reason why you need to understand what's going on in Israel is to understand what's going on in Gaza. And the reason why you need to understand what's going on in Gaza is relevant to electoral arithmetic, to be cynical for a moment, in both the United Kingdom, most obviously for us, if not for you, and the United States of America. So it's not, you can't just say, oh, it's their business, let them get on with it. Humanitarian causes, never mind international law, depend upon taking a deep and profound interest in what happens elsewhere in the world, particularly when it is moving into or close to territory that many people would consider to be breaches of international law. What do you think has changed this weekend? What I was interested in was the tension between Biden's language and Netanyahu's decisions. Biden says red line. Even today, you've got White House spokespeople essentially saying they really, really, really don't want them to do this, and they've done it. What does that change? Because I've got a horrible feeling as we near the end of this conversation, not just with you, but this topic in general, that nothing's changed except more proof that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't really care what anybody else says to him outside his own cabinet.
Well, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I don't think anything has changed. But the other thing, I just want to counter your point there. Gaza is an occupied territory. It's not Israel.
Yes.
So this is international because of that.
Yes.
That has to be stated clearly.
Absolutely. Categorically true.
And basically, that's where we all come into it. And that's basically, you're occupying another territory. Like we did with Russia when it invaded Ukraine.
Well, bits of what you said are true, but the terror attack of October the 7th changes the dynamic of that comparison. There was no provocation by Ukraine. There was no terror attack by Ukraine to which Russia then responded. So the two things aren't the same in that sense. But in terms of international law and what occupation means, your point stands. And talking about journalism and the importance of finding out what is going on, the Estonian. I think this is really interesting because I feel often that we are a little bit myopic on in this corner of the world. I think the Irish media, oddly, does a better job than much of the British media. But the official account of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia has responded to that closure of the Al Jazeera offices in Israel, shutting down Al Jazeera in Israel. It's responded in this way: media freedom is one of the most important pillars of democracy. The decision of Israeli authorities to shut down Al Jazeera in Israel undermines the principle of free dissemination of information, which is crucial, especially in times of conflict. And now, I mean, that's so powerful from the Estonian Foreign Ministry. There is an age-old anti-Semitic trope that the Israeli government controls the world's media or controls Western news organizations or can have its bidding done by news groups all over the planet. And of course, and we had a conspiracy theory text not long ago. This is absolutely incontrovertible evidence of Israel shutting down Al Jazeera. You don't need a conspiracy theory. You should steer clear of conspiracy theories because otherwise you undermine observable reality in the way that this story is truly chilling. 11:16 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, let's do that then. Let's look now at that. Let's bring back, staying in the broader context of Middle East conflict, but bringing it back to British politics. The observation yesterday by Miqdad Versi in The Guardian that Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham won elections by engaging with citizens, won elections in what Versi describes as areas with large Muslim populations. So it's sort of London and Greater Manchester, obviously. And we know that many councillors in the elections last week were ousted by independent candidates who were standing on very much a pro-Gaza ticket. I don't know how comfortable I am with describing that as an exclusively Muslim phenomenon, but there is a campaign group called The Muslim Vote, which has issued a list of 18 requests that they want the Labour Party to sign up to in order to secure the support of this movement. So that's clearly a Muslim thing. But I think there are plenty of people unhappy with Labour's position on this issue to the point of reconsidering their vote. So how do we get a handle on it? See, opinion polling is only helpful up to a point. I could ask an opinion poll question about how much you care about a given issue, or are you bothered by the Labour Party's policies on this very specific issue? And you will come back to me and say yes, and you may even, on a scale of 1 to 10, if the opinion poll is framed in that way, you might sign up for I feel very, very strongly. But until you walk into the ballot box and you're presented with a list of options, you won't know whether or not a little bit of dissatisfaction or a lot of dissatisfaction with Keir Starmer's attitudes or the Labour Party's position on this issue is actually going to influence your vote, is going to influence your electoral decisions. It picks up on that interview Nick did with Keir Starmer shortly after the October the 7th atrocity, and despite their best efforts to row back immediately from what he said on air, unfortunately, once it has been said on air, you don't have the luxury of I was saying I didn't really mean that. The clip will be halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. And when he said that he essentially supported collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza, something he desperately tried to disown within minutes. I was sitting in the office while the attempt to say that's not what we meant went into overdrive. Some people are never going to be able to forgive him for that. Indeed, one interview which Nick Dadversi speaks of, encountering often in his local area, cites that interview very specifically, with one respondent saying, "How can I vote for someone who won't even apologise for this?" It had been misinterpreted. The stance on Gaza did move, but by then 25,000 Palestinians were already dead, and most of them were women and children. So how do we get a handle on this? Given that Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham are Labour politicians, David Lammy has insisted, I think often, that Israel should comply with the ICJ ruling in full, and there have been calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Minister for International Development, has called for funding for UNRWA, the UN relief agency, to be resumed. And yet, in the eyes of many voters, Keir Starmer's original comments on the issue on this radio station and subsequent, what would you call it? Fudging? Subsequent lack of clarity or subsequent caution? There's the word. I do like it when that works. What I hate is when I start thinking out loud about what word I want to use and I don't find the right word. That just makes me sound like a flump. But caution, Keir Starmer's excessive caution in this place being a problem. I want you to tell me how big a problem you think this is for the Labour Party. And you can do that in one of two ways. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You can do it either by telling me how big a problem it is for you. So, the failure of Keir Starmer to distance himself immediately from apparent support for the collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza, which is against international law, the failure of the whole party to really harden its position on ceasefires until well over 25,000 Palestinians had been killed, and also the tension, if you like, between some Labour politicians, both on the front bench, like David Lammy, or pursuing their own political projects, like Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, possibly showing what you would have preferred Keir Starmer to do. But then, of course, there are Jewish voters. Or, to make the same point about the Muslim vote, there are votes that come from traditional historic supporters of the State of Israel, not necessarily people who support what is currently happening or what is currently being done by the State of Israel, but people whose passionate belief in the necessity and importance of the modern State of Israel also have votes as well. So where are you sitting on this? We talk an awful lot about Starmer having a problem with the, let's call it the pro-Gaza vote, let's call it the Gaza vote. But what about the Israel vote? I mean, traditional supporters of the Labour Party from the Jewish community had an absolutely horrendous time of it between 2015 and 2019. I mean, an unbearably horrible, variety of unbearably horrible experiences. And he also wants votes from those people as well. He's worked incredibly hard to sanitise the party from some of the pollutants that had made life so difficult for Jewish Labour supporters. So three things occurred to me. The first is that I don't want to talk about the Jewish vote or the Muslim vote, but I do want to talk about votes that are largely dependent on the attitude to the current Israeli Gaza situation. I want to know about personal positions, whether or not this is something you feel so strongly about that you won't be able to support your Labour candidate in a general election if and when we ever have one. And I particularly want to talk to you if you are surprised to find yourself in that position. If a year ago you would have found it hard to imagine circumstances in which you wouldn't vote for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party, but now the Gaza situation is that moment, okay? And you are more likely to be Muslim, but by no means guaranteed. 0345 6060 973. And then for the rest of us, if you like, people who are not over the moon with Keir Starmer's position, but who are so keen to see the back of the current clown car that's been occupying Downing Street for 14 years, that it would have to be much worse than it is now to move the electoral dial. How big do you think the problem is? How big a problem do you think Starmer has got with the Gaza vote? One voter again told Mikdad Versi for this rather good piece yesterday, a future PM is supposed to lead, not follow. When is he actually going to lead? And this is a quote from somebody that Mikdad Versi interviewed for his piece in The Guardian yesterday. When is he, Starmer, going to actually lead and stop our taxpayer money funding arms going to this apartheid state? So the words of someone that was speaking to The Guardian yesterday. And that gets to the crux of the matter, says this article. Can Labour get these voters back, or will that interview prove to be a bit of a Gillian Duffy moment? You remember when Gordon Brown didn't know that he still had a microphone. He forgot that he still had a microphone on, and a woman who essentially was recycling Daily Mail lines about immigrants just over the horizon bearded him on the campaign trail, and the microphone was still on him when he got into the back of the car, and it recorded him saying to aides, describing that woman, Gillian Duffy was her name, to aides as a bigoted woman. And in many ways, it broke that election campaign. I think it did. Certainly history attests that that's what did for them. That and the widespread lie about the global financial crisis being somehow the fault of Labour Party policies, lies that are still being told by Conservative politicians, and which David Cameron and George Osborne lied about all the way into Downing Street. If you're interested in that little corner of history, what Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling did on the global stage in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis was a genuine cause for celebration. It was truly world-beating behaviour, but in a country defined often by right-wing media, I'm afraid that the lie that they were somehow responsible for the mess rather than responsible for the recovery. At one point, I think one of them was in Europe and one of them was in America, literally signing up the whole world to Gordon Brown's plans for fiscal rehabilitation, and they succeeded. But if you were reading about it in most British newspapers, you'd have got a very different impression. So I just mentioned all of that because the Gillian Duffy moment for Gordon Brown was probably more crucial than anything to do with the economy or to do with the recovery or to do with the global financial crash. And the suggestion is that for Starmer, there's a similar jeopardy in play, that he will be unforgiven for this. And then you're just left with the question of not so much how big a deal it is, but how many people are really going to go into the polling booth later this year or very early next year and increase the likelihood of a hung parliament, which Rishi Sunak was talking gibberish about this weekend, or even a Tory 17th term or whatever it would be by then, because of what Keir Starmer has or hasn't done with regard to Gaza. So how big a problem is Gaza for Labour? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And sorry to pile this on you, but if you are a Jewish voter who can't quite believe that you have been successfully tempted back into the Labour fold, where does this story sit on your electoral dial as well? This is one where I haven't got strong opinions, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about other people's processing and calculations. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I wonder how much it came up on the doorstep. I got one texter here saying that door knocking for Labour in the council elections, no one mentioned ULEZ and no one mentioned Gaza. So I'm interested in that. I know that the plural of anecdote is not data, but I am still interested in anecdotes. So, the experiences you've had out on the doorstep, whether or not Labour have a big problem with this particular issue or whether or not it's something of a storm in a teacup. I like this from Mike. I've tried, Mike. Give me a break. He says, can we at some stage expand the Jewish vote, Muslim vote debate? It is, of course, a huge issue. But discussing religion and politics out of that bubble, bring in Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh voices as well. Well, and irreligious voices, atheist voices, of course. But I think inevitably, mate, Gaza is seen as an Israel-Palestinian issue and a Jewish-Muslim issue, and it is the Muslim vote that Labour are worried about, albeit that it's a bit of a misrepresentation, a bit of a misnomer, because there'll be plenty of people that have never been near a mosque or a synagogue in their lives who will be feeling their political pendulum swing according to what the major parties are doing with regard to this issue. Ben's in Halesowen. Ben, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Look,
Ben.
it's clearly an issue for Labour. I think it's a bit overblown,
Do you?
If I'm honest. Yeah, I do. I mean, I've knocked doors. It doesn't come up in the Black Country, mate.
No. Not at all?
Well, not when... look, I'm one person that's knocked doors. It's not an issue.
Yeah, but how many doors have you knocked?
A lot of doors, James.
A lot of doors. a lot of doors.
Right. It's just not, but it is an issue. But you saw with Labour winning the Birmingham mayoralty, okay, do you know what? Yeah. There was definitely a portion of a vote that went to the independent, and I think Labour have to acknowledge that. But to win that contest, I mean, I didn't think we were going to win it, James, at all. So if Labour is winning, and we've taken seats in Dudley as well, which is a Tory stronghold, we're on the right track. This is an issue, but it is one that's overblown. And the problem that Labour's got, look, that Keir Starmer interview on LBC did a lot of damage, didn't it? We're not going to pretend it didn't. And I could sit here and claim, well, it's very unfair because since he's clarified and they tried to do so straight away. It doesn't matter, does it? It was an own goal.
Yeah, huge.
But look, Labour have since voted for a ceasefire. But what you see, what the response to that was, well, that doesn't count.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, I think, that Labour have. It doesn't matter how far Labour go for a percentage of the people that voted to punish Labour in those elections last week, because it will never be further enough.
And what we must be careful of doing is something you can often do after council election results is concluding that a council election provides an accurate reflection or prediction of a general election, which it categorically doesn't. There's an awful lot of people that cast their votes differently in locals compared to how they do in nationals. And B, and we haven't alluded to this yet, Ben, because, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but B, allowing too much speculation to creep into the space created by sort of 24-hour news cycles, which is why, incredibly, when I went home on Friday, people had started talking quite high volume, up to and including the political editor of the BBC, about the prospect of Susan Hall winning in London. So, you find a tiny, tiny little acorn, and there's a danger of people who ring into radio phone-in programmes, never mind people who present them, turning them into full-blown oaks.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that, James, because you've mentioned a group, I think, is it Muslim Vote?
Yes.
That has published their 18 demands. Now, those 18 demands, fine, there'll be some that I think do match with Labour values,
yes,
and Labour should engage with the ones that do, and there's ones that clearly don't. Is that a shopping list that has to be everything? Or is it a conversation? But do you know how many followers that account has?
No.
2,700.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm always intrigued by that kind of arithmetic, and yet it merits the 18 demands merits a good show in today's Times newspaper. Partly perhaps because the fellow who's been elected for the Greens in Leeds, who seems to have had some pretty pungent positions in the past, he is of one of them. He is, I think, of their number. Or at least he is part of this phenomenon, isn't he, whereby some Labour and Tory incumbents have been ousted by other candidates who campaigned almost exclusively on Gaza. So no, I don't think he's part of the campaign. He's just in the same paragraph because he's an example of seats being lost in the locals to candidates who went in very, very hard on Gaza. How will we know? I mean, it's not. I believe you. It's not happening on the doorsteps. I think Andy Street is a great example, actually. A better example than Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, actually. The Birmingham result it is even more evidence that there may not be anywhere near as much to this as some of the observers are claiming.
I think there is something to it. I think there is a real possibility, James, that our political landscape has been changed forever by Israel's war on Hamas. I think we could see a growth in religious voting. Yeah. At the moment, there's an alliance between what I personally would call the extreme left and the pro-Palestine sort of protests and things like that. We've already seen how uneasy that alliance will be because of George Galloway's comments last week.
Yes.
So,
you mean about homosexuality?
Those are the ones. month. Yeah.
Did you see him on with Lewis on Sunday, on Lewis's new show on Sunday?
It was probably the funniest 3 minutes I managed to catch all weekend, actually. The bit when he screams, "You cut out the transgender bit," was just hilarious.
It's worth having a look at the clip. Lewis hit the ground running, it's fair to say, on Sunday morning with his new show. It took them ages in focus groups to come up with the title for this. It's called Sunday Mornings with Lewis Goodall. It's on Sunday morning, and you'll never guess who presents it. Ben, thank you. Knocking on doors, not coming up, doesn't mean it isn't a big deal. I did 4 hours, this is from Nick, door knocking on Thursday in London for Labour. ULEZ didn't come up on the doorstep. Gaza didn't come up either. Luckily, all these new councillors will bring peace to Gaza by Friday. Sunak has no impact on Israel. Starmer has arguably even less. People just need to grow up. Up to a point, Lord Copper, because you also want to know what a public position is. Tazimra is in Stockton-on-Tees. Tazimra, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
So I'd like to say that I think it's a big problem, Keir Starmer's stance on Israel and Gaza. For the first time ever, I'm not going to be voting Labour.
Right.
I've always been a Labour supporter. I am Muslim. I know that might make a difference because there's a Muslim vote. But I like to think that I've got enough sense to vote for what is morally right. And I don't think it's about Muslims or Jewish people. I think it's about what's morally right. And we don't have a voice. And I don't mean Muslims. I mean the people who are fighting for the rights of the Palestinians just to have a right to exist. They don't have a voice in the main political parties at the moment. So with the Tories or with Labour, and we're kind of left voiceless, really. So, yeah, I think it's so important to have that voice, and we don't.
What do you say? Okay, so where are you? Stockton-on-Tees. So you don't have the benefit of a mayor either, do you? Who has gone much further than Keir Starmer has. But what do you say to someone who points out Israel has called for a ceasefire? The Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has gone further, perhaps, than some of his colleagues, calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Lisa Nandy, Shadow Minister for International Development, calling for funding for UNRWA to be resumed. I mean, there is a lot. There's quite a lot on the list, a lot more than there was in the second week of October of last year, of things that Labour is doing as a party that the Conservatives are not. So why wouldn't you vote for a party that's calling for a ceasefire and at the same time calling for greater humanitarian support for the people, for the Palestinian people in Gaza? What more can they do?
I think it's a lot. It's too late. Not too late.
No, you can say that it's too late. You can say that
it's a little too. Yeah, it's a little too late for me personally. I appreciate that 7th of October needed to have a focus on the Israeli people. I understand that. But then when the atrocities started happening from Israel's side towards the people of Gaza, it was just silence. It was a deafening silence of just all of these politicians not saying what is morally right. And it was.
But I've just told you that they do now. So there's no way back for you then. They should have done it soon. See, this is the problem, actually, for me, on a personal level, never mind a professional one, is the conversations we had on the programme, and I don't know how many of them you would have been able to listen to, were defined for a long time by questions of proportionality and excess. No one could answer the question, wherever they stood on this issue. For example, how much death will be too much death for Israel? At what point would the acceptance of the necessity of a robust response to the October 7th terror attack, at what point would that tip into excess? At what point would Israel lose your support for a campaign of retribution or simply a campaign of response? And I think most people feel that point was passed some time ago, but they would struggle to pinpoint precisely when. And that makes your position a little bit harder to unpick, because at what point did it become too late for Labour? Do you see what I mean? At what point? So this article points at 25,000 Palestinians, the majority of whom, as you will know, are women and children. So 25,000 is too late. Would 5,000 have been soon enough? I hate the cynicism of this question, but I can't think of any other way of phrasing it.
There's no right answer. There really isn't.
No, but there's your answer.
Exactly, and mine is an opinion, and I don't think that there's any right answer. I think any death is bad. Any amount of death is bad. But really, the problem has been going on before the 7th, and there should have been a solution a lot longer, way before that the 7th of October even happened. Yeah. And I don't think it would have happened had there been pressure from the world.
Maybe not. So, but to steer it back to Starmer, if he simply hadn't tripped himself up on LBC, if he'd simply said that collective punishment is against international law, and therefore, of course, Israel shouldn't undertake it, then it actually wouldn't have mattered much.
Absolutely correct.
What happened next, because he's not in charge. But it's that is the potential Gillian Duffy moment for him, and I guess depends how many people sign up for that. Will you vote? Will you vote for someone else, or will you just stay at home?
Not this time. I've never not voted either.
So that's what you're going to do, though. You're going to not vote.
Yes.
Because I'm hearing that a bit. I mean, again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but Andrea has been on the doorstep as well, and she writes, in one ward in Basingstoke, 2 residents said they couldn't vote Labour because of their stance on Gaza. One of them also said they wouldn't vote at all. Or they wouldn't vote Lib Dem either because they felt their stance on Gaza wasn't strong enough. Both said they would absolutely not vote Tory. It may have come up in other wards, but I can only speak for the one I was working in. 11:46 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 12 and you're listening. Gosh, is it really? It's one of those days. I think the harder I have to concentrate on a subject, the faster time goes. And if we're discussing matters Middle Eastern, I can't really relax. So that's why I thought if you said to me it was 10 to 11, I'd have gone, yeah, fair enough. But it's not. It's definitely 10 to 12. If you are just tuning in, there is currently no dispute about the time. It is definitely 10 to 12. I'm just a little taken aback at how quickly we've rattled through it. And back to the question of how big an issue Gaza-based policy is for Labour. How big a problem, perhaps, it is for Labour. The consensus on this programme is not as big as other corners of the media may suggest. And I think today is a day to reflect upon the fact that on Friday, when I went home, when I handed over to Sheila on Friday, the chatter about the possibility of Susan Hall achieving victory against Sadiq Khan in London had begun to approach fever pitch, culminating in the former political editor and now presenter of the flagship Sunday morning politics programme on the BBC, actually writing explicitly, it is clear that the contest is going to be much closer than expected, when actually it was never clear. Just a lot of journalists chatting journalism, and the polar opposite turned out to be true. It was categorically not closer than widely expected. So you've got to be a little bit careful about political chatter. However, there were candidates ousted in the locals by other candidates campaigning very strongly on the issue of Gaza. Some of them were independents, some of them were Greens. Is it something that the National Labour Party should be worried about? Tamara is in Westminster. Tamara, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I was Muslim. I'm nominally Muslim, not really practicing.
Sure.
And I absolutely defend a sort of narrowing of this issue. I'm not saying you're doing it, but some of the framing, John McDonnell has done it online.
Yes.
The frame of this issue.
I think I really want to hear more from you, and the phone line's not good enough. And because the phone line's not good enough, I'm not going to encourage you to make your point quickly. I'm going to try and improve your phone line. Can we prioritise Tamara? I'd get her to go up a ladder or something, as long as she's safe. I really want to hear what she's got to say, because that fascinates me, that perspective. Before we try again with Tamara, let's go to Ruth, who's in Matlock. Ruth, what would you like to say?
Hello, thank you for taking my call, James.
You're very welcome.
I'm Jewish. I live in Derbyshire. I had a very Orthodox mother, a very proud Jewish father, and I've got a very proud Jewish daughter. I'm going to vote Labour come what may. I'm absolutely appalled with what has been going on since the 7th of October, including the 7th of October, obviously. The only people suffering are the hostages, the people of Gaza, and the people that have lost anybody, etc., etc. But I would do anything to stop me feeling like I did in 2019 when I got up in the morning and Johnson had an 80-odd majority. I cried all day. I walked my dog numerous times. I couldn't put two words together. I was mortified, and I never want to feel like that again. Starmer is an idiot. All he would have to do today,
This is why I love my job. There are no circumstances under God's own sky in which I would not vote for that blithering idiot over there. That's what you've just said to me. Yes.
Well,
I love it.
I left the Labour Party when his 10 pledges were completely put down the toilet. And I'm principled on things like that, but I just cannot bear the thought of these Tories getting back in. These people.
Thank you, Ruth.
These people
getting another go. What would you do, though? Another 5 years of saying it's nothing to do with us. We've only been in charge for 15, 16, 17, 18, 19.
Yeah, I couldn't contemplate it. I'd have to go to bed. I'd have to go to bed and never get up, to be honest.
Well, none of us want that.
However, what I would say...
Yes.
Yeah. I have left the Labour Party on Neil Kinnock in 1980s. This is how old I am.
Yes.
But I'm just living in hope. I keep saying to all my left-wing socialist friends, just let's see what happens when he gets in.
You need power to make changes, and if you don't go on.
All he'd have to do today is get up in Parliament and saying, enough's enough.
Well, he's come close to saying that, but perhaps not close enough.
Yeah, and David Lammy has. He's come close. And there are good socialists.
I like you. You're the walking, talking embodiment of refusing to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, aren't you? And I remember a teacher who rang in. I don't know whether you were listening. I talked about it. You don't have to marry the man. You just have to recognise he's the only one driving a bus that is heading away from the current Conservative mess. He is driving a bus in that is what is roughly the right direction, but you don't have to marry him. But I love that. He's an absolute idiot, but I can't contemplate voting for anybody else. And I know before any pedant gets their pencil out that you don't vote unless you live in Islington. You don't, or wherever. Where is Keir Starmer? Holborn, I think, his constituency is. You don't vote for Keir Starmer unless you live in his constituency. But we know what we mean when we have conversations like this. 11:55 is the time. We're struggling to get Tamara. Oh no, we're going to try again. I hope it works. Tamara, you were objecting to the framing of the very concept, I think, of this being a quotes Muslim vote end quotes issue.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. I think that's really it reduces it to a kind of it discounts it as an issue. It diminishes it as an issue when you make it.
Yeah.
Not you.
You know, there's a campaign group here called the Muslim Vote. So you have to have the conversation. Yeah. And they're the ones that have published 18 demands for Starmer to regain their support. I don't know what their mandate is, but I think you're being a bit optimistic if you think we're going to be able to conduct some of these conversations without deploying that phrase.
Absolutely. I totally get that. I suppose the point I'm making is that, and it's profoundly depressing to me, I'm just going to say it, to hear that it is not an issue on the doorstep.
Right.
I find that profoundly depressing because as a human, there is a very simple line for me here. And we can look back and say Starmer could have said this, he could have done that, whatever. But fundamentally, at the point he misspoke, right, it was really on October the 8th, it was open to him to say, Israel has a right to defend itself, but I would encourage it to consider its proportionality, to not dive in. We understand why Israel is angry right now, but to caution against what we are seeing and have been watching for the last 7 months play out.
And what many people feared and predicted
would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, look, but Netanyahu is, unfortunately, there was a moment in truth where a more emotionally intelligent leader and his cohort could have pivoted and done something very different and not engage in the knee-jerk. And let's also hold in mind that Netanyahu has wanted this moment to arise. He has supported Hamas. Anyone who knows the context, the history of the region understands it is not as straightforward as October the 7th happened, and there is our response from there. Absolutely, categorically not.
But are you, so then, because I could now, as I've done with previous callers, point at subsequent developments, subsequent repositionings, which might be part of the reason why it's not coming up on the doorstep. Labour is now perceived as a party that wants a ceasefire, that has shifted in some ways, but that's still not good enough for you.
Well, I think there is a problem, which is it's 40,000 people too late. I think I I'm afraid I see the influence that Labour Friends of Israel and Conservative Friends of Israel, for that matter, have on our politics. That is hugely problematic to me. That is still something.
Well, we're talking about a grassroots Muslim campaign called the Muslim Vote. So the thing about lobby groups, or the thing about people who seek to secure influence.
2,000 members.
But it's still, that's not the point, is it? You can't complain because one is more effective than another when they both exist. So I think Starmer's fear of being painted with some of the accusations that Jeremy Corbyn probably deserved and Starmer doesn't, that explains part of his caution. That explains part of his excessive caution.
Yeah. Right. Well, I might say, in the words of the late, great James Baldwin, I don't believe a word you say because I see what you do.
Yes.
And I think the bottom line,
You're talking about Keir Starmer now, not me, just to be clear.
I am talking about, yes. I'm talking about Starmer.
I just have to, you know what my inbox is like tomorrow. Occasionally, I just, here you go. Here's Michael in Leeds. You are so thick, he writes. It's impossible to distinguish between Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas fighters, so you've got to kill them all. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah. But actually, to that point, your previous caller, Ben, referenced, Israel's war on Hamas. Nobody with eyes to see and a functioning brain sees this as a war on Hamas.
Not
however
anymore.
It's dressed
Not
up.
anymore. I mean, the question of how long it was perceived as such, as you say, it might be 40,000 deaths too late for Keir Starmer to come out against this policy, a policy that, of course, has been escalated over the course of this weekend. But no, well, except that there are people with brains who are still arguing that this is both a justified and effective, like our friend in Leeds, way of going after Hamas. It's just that they've now gone a little bit silent about the hostages, which at one point were also the red line, the absolute rationale, the full justification for everything that Israel is doing is the release of the hostages. And yet Netanyahu now dancing to the tune of extremists in his own cabinet who don't appear to give a single fig about the hostages because their goals are altogether bigger and more dangerous. Tamara, thank you. Gosh, 2 hours back in the middle of Middle Eastern politics, and once again, I think I'm not going to lie to you. All right, when I said to you at 10:05 this morning that the quality of the calls that we've had on this issue have been exemplary, incredible, illuminating, and I would like to think genre-defying when it comes to the traditional perspectives of the radio phone-in. I did open the door to the possibility that early contributions would not live up to that lofty billing. But I'm confident that later contributions did. Tamara perhaps being a case in point. It's 1 minute, because that's the point about a conversation. It's 1 minute after 12.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I haven't currently got an unhinged headline for you today. We've been really good lately. Unhinged headline has become the only feature in the history of this programme to actually survive the vicissitudes of my declining memory. In other words, I forget. I have a great idea. We even go to the trouble of getting some production commissioned, like a voiceover guy, and then I forget all about it. When's the last time we did Woke Watch? Woke Watch was great because that had the shtum on it as well, didn't it? Shtum. Does Unhinged headline have a shtum as well? Does it have a shtum? It does. Is it the same shtum? So basically, we just changed the words on the thing, and it still takes me months to get it. Anyway, I haven't been able to find an unhinged headline for you today, but I'm always happy to accept nominations. You can, of course, WhatsApp them these days to 03456060973. But I have got an unhinged article. This is again, I've got this slightly grim fascination with the Daily Telegraph's comment pages. So there's a new Brexit excuse there today. This is one of their comment writers who's had every single thing they've wanted for the last 14 years and are now complaining about what an almighty mess it is. So try this on for size. In particular, an unholy trinity of Tory sins gnaws at traditional voters. First, the party granted a referendum on Brexit, a project it never believed in, and thus handled abysmally. So the reason why Brexit has gone so badly is because of the people that didn't want to have Brexit. Nothing to do with all the people that got the Brexit that they wanted and who, in 2019, were given full control of everything and who proceeded to to coin a phrase, to spaff it up the wall. But the headline on the article, Britain's next political earthquake could utterly destroy the Tories. I don't think that's unhinged at all. I think that is, it might be wishful thinking, but it's certainly a defensible position. All right, speaking of defence, we move now to matters legal. You know, when we talk about privatisation of the NHS, and we stumble into, and another point there from Chris, what happened to Smear Keir? I think it turned into Smear Angela, didn't it, really? Or Smear Rayner. The Smear Keir stuff lost a little bit of its oomph because it wasn't landing. But we shall carry on with the programme proper now. When we talk about the privatisation of the NHS, something quite odd happens. And I find it enormously gratifying after all the years of doing this show, when we stumble into a way of bringing quite a well-rehearsed issue or well-rehearsed conversation into new light. And the way we did it with the privatisation of the NHS was by recognising the cocktail, if you like, of 14 years of Tory rule, austerity, then plus Johnson and Truss, equals waiting lists, underfunding, under-resourced NHS, all manner of problems in the health service, and a correlation and causation are cousins, but very, very hard sometimes to distinguish precisely where one ends and the other begins. But at the same time, there has been a growing turn towards private health organisations. And for me, politically, the most fascinating way to examine this was to talk to people who had almost against their not just against their better judgment, but almost, what's the phrase I'm looking for? When you do something you really like, through gritted teeth, people had gone private. There was a grandma, wasn't there, whose little, I think it was your grandson's tonsils that were in such a state, the poor lad was in constant pain and the waiting list was months hence. So you went against every bone, I'd say bone in your body is the phrase I'm looking for, isn't it? It offended every political bone in your body. But the choice between offending every political bone in your body or leaving your little grandson in agony was no choice at all. So you ended up going private. And then we had NHS workers who had managed to avoid NHS waiting lists by cashing in some money and going private. And what I found most fascinating about, or what I still find most fascinating about the conversation, is the way that political principle and personal experience, lived experience, can often be in conflict with each other. So I am a passionate supporter of the NHS. I know that the bigger private health gets, the bigger threat it poses to the NHS, but my kids are poorly and therefore I'm going to write a cheque for private. And who here is going to shout at someone for committing the crime of paying money to provide medical care for someone that they love, or for themselves? I suppose it'd be a bit easier to shout at you if you were doing it for yourself, but my point stands. I don't know whether to bring that analysis into this conversation or not. Two stories jumped out at me today, one in the Telegraph, one in the Mail. The one in the Mail is everywhere. Police fail to solve 600 burglaries every day. This is some 215,000 burglaries last year that have gone unsolved. 76% of all break-ins reported to police in England and Wales. Only 6% of burglaries resulted in a suspect being taken to court. I'll say that again, 6%. These are the Home Office figures that the Liberal Democrats have got hold of. 215,933 burglaries went unsolved in 2023, right? It's gone up, actually, year on year, even though police chiefs, we said at the time, there's no point giving a commitment that you're going to send an officer to every burgled home. I want explanations of how you're going to catch more burglars. Which brings us to the story in the Telegraph today. First burglar jailed after private police prosecution. There's a sub-editor there who shares my love for alliteration. First burglar jailed after private police prosecution. So what could this possibly be about? Well, it's about a private police service, or I suppose, I'm not sure you can call it a police service if it's private, but you have detectives. You have a company which provides uniformed staff and plainclothes detectives who patrol shopping areas for the local retailers. You pay them separately. You pay your taxes, business taxes in this case as well, in expectation of police protection. But if you are a business owner, particularly in the retail sector, you are not getting it. And that's where this company, which is called TMI Operations, I think its trading name is My Local Bobby. And I think the offices are just near here, actually. I think I've seen that, would you believe, on a doorbell, you know, on the buzzers that you see in office block doorways. And they've already successfully prosecuted 280 shoplifters. But in Streatham Hill, Marks and Spencer's, they have now secured a burglary prosecution. So it's a private security company founded by a former Scotland Yard DCI. It provides bobbies, which I guess circumvents the illegality, I'm sure, of claiming that they are police. They're not police. They provide uniformed staff and plainclothes operators to help retailers combat shoplifting and thefts in shopping precincts. So the actual police are failing to solve more than 215,000 burglaries in a year. And these privatised quasi-police have brought a prosecution, the details of which I'll share with you shortly. And it's a fascinating case because they arrested him. So the culprit was arrested by two detectives from My Local Bobby, having broken into Marks and Spencer's through a reinforced glass window before making off with meat and Prosecco to the value of about £500 worth of steak and 20 bottles of Prosecco. He was caught on CCTV. Listen to this, because you'll struggle to believe this, all right? He was caught on CCTV. The store manager called the police, and the Metropolitan Police decided not to investigate. So 1, 2, 3. Caught on CCTV, called the police, and the Met said, we're not going to investigate. So this private company stepped in. They, as presumably the police could have done as well, recognised him from the CCTV footage and arrested him. I guess that would be a citizen's arrest, would it? I guess it would. So they knew his haunts. They recognised him as a prolific shoplifter. They arrested him and secured his admission of the offence on their body-worn video, which was submitted to the court. The founder of the company said he was detained and immediately admitted the recent burglary and an earlier burglary at the same premises some days before, which was also written off by police. The lesson is that every burglary deserves an investigation because there is always an opportunity to solve the case if you take the time to do the basics. He did not add, and obviously this is a fantastic advertisement for my private company, which I hope will make me very rich. I'm not criticising that. I just think it's important to bear these things in mind when you're discussing privatisation-based issues. So my first thought was, this is exactly like private health. Because you're thinking, or I am, this sounds a bit rum. I'm not sure that who do they answer to? Who are they accountable to? It's a private sector company. And they're arresting people. How do you know? What measures? I'm not suggesting for a minute that anything untoward has happened, but how do you know that it wouldn't in the future with a different company or with different operatives? But at the same time, you're thinking, oh, well, how much is it? Because if I get burgled, I'd quite like these fellas on the case, and not the police who can't be bothered. That's not fair. Not the police who don't have the resources or the energies to properly investigate. And that's where it made me think of the private health conversations that we've had recently, where against every political bone in your body, you've written a cheque for medical treatment. So what conversation are we going to have today? Because I don't think there's going to be enough lived experience out there of private police companies. Perhaps there is. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. He's being prosecuted, by the way. He's been jailed. He has gone to jail. So a citizen of these islands has gone to jail after being arrested by two other citizens of these islands for burglary. And the police have had absolutely nothing to do with it at any stage of the process. Do you, like me, feel simultaneously uncomfortable and intrigued? 0345 6060 973. What do you feel uncomfortable about? What about police officers, past or present? I know serving police officers are a little bit limited on what they can and can't say to me. I guess what I want you to tell me is should we be resisting this kind of thing? The problem is, you make the argument for, well, hang on a minute, if they hadn't done it, he'd still be out there burgling, which is probably true. But then if you become supportive of it, you reduce the likelihood of the police ever getting back to the sort of capacity that it once had, when it would have been a given that, do you remember I told you my mum was so upset with me for sharing that shoplifting story with you? I should have realised she would be. It brought it all back for her. It's all very well me using it to try and focus your attention on the shoplifting conversations from a slightly different angle, but poor old mum was just reliving it all. It was like we were back in the Swan Centre in Kidderminster in 1988. So sorry, mum, I should have thought of your feelings a little bit more. But we used that just to illustrate how attitudes to shoplifting from the police have changed completely, from the days when a teenager could get arrested and have the book thrown at him to the days when you can walk out of Marks and Spencer's under the nose of the manager with pockets full of sandwiches and booze, and nobody's going to do anything about it. So if you want to get the police back to that level, surely allowing these private companies into the space being vacated is a disaster for everybody. Or is it? Let's get the phone lines open. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So I've got a vague sense of discomfort coupled with the knowledge that, given the choice between no prosecutions at all and this prosecution, I think most of us would choose this prosecution. It's 12:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 12. What I'm trying to articulate, and probably failing, is the difference between practical and principle. If you were burgled last night and I said, give me 500 quid and I'll catch the burglars, you'd take it, right? If you had 500 quid left after the burglars have gone, you'd take it. If I said to you, do you want to replace the police force with privately funded operatives, you'd say no. So how can you hold both of those positions simultaneously? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call with your thoughts on 600, well, whatever the figure was. I mean, countless burglaries going unsolved in this country. But at the same time, a successful prosecution being brought by a private security company. Alex is in Cambridge. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I'm a serving frontline police officer. Okay. When it comes to this company, I'm pretty much fair play to them. If they've managed to get this and they've managed to secure a prosecution, I'm very happy with that result. However, what I am a little worried about is with the amount of funding cuts that we've received when it comes to dealing with these types of investigations and limited time we've had, that more people turn to it and the Tories essentially turn around and
well, you can't. Yes, well, so you can't have it both ways, though, or can you? Because you say fair play to them, and so do I. But what would you, if you were running a shop now, and you had a problem with burglary, you'd be phoning these people up immediately.
Yeah, I would.
And that takes pressure off government to improve the service that the police are receiving. Or does it? I don't know. I think it does, doesn't it?
I think it does take pressure off the government, this particular government that we've got right now, to justify not investing any more money in the actual police service, thinking that it can get by on having a lot more people rely on private.
So you're pushing me further. I don't know if I want anybody privately funded making arrests.
Well, private citizens can make arrests for an indictable offence.
Yeah, but there's a difference between doing it out of your sense of public duty and doing it for coins.
Yeah, I agree. It is a pretty big moral conundrum. I don't think there's a correct answer here. As you said, it's a match between the practicality of it is that lots of these do go unsolved because we don't have the time or resources to be able to allocate and deal with them.
And there's the tension. It's not a great phone line, so very, very, very briefly, have you ever come across citizens' arrests in your career?
I've come across detained shoplifters quite a few times by staff. Some of them have done it correctly. Some of them.
You've got to be careful not just for legal reasons, but for reasons of personal safety as well. Alex, thank you, mate. The phone line has defeated us. There's a couple of other things I'd like to have asked you, but I will deny myself that pleasure. And return once again to this slight. Alex touches upon it. I don't know how I feel. A few people mentioning the post office scandal where private prosecutions featured pretty heavily, and look what happened there. You're getting paid to be a police officer. So why does it feel so different from getting paid to be a private security officer? 0345 6060 973. Dinesh is in Oxford. Dinesh, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. This is a slippery slope. I'll give you my own examples of what my own experience was. I was stabbed at night.
It's another terrible phone line. I'm being trolled today. I'm being trolled by the technology today, Dinesh. Can we try and improve that phone line, or just see if we can put him through on a better line, because that sounded like a terrible business, and I think it's just bad luck. I don't think there's anything going on. What's the thing that I'm trying to describe? The tension between saying, yes, I know this is probably big picture bad, but little picture, as in my personal experiences, I'm going to sign up for this. I suppose we also need to look at the question of why the police are failing to solve so many burglaries. I joked this morning with Eleanor about my career having latterly turned into an attempt to stretch one very thin anecdote over 254 news stories. That's why I reached for the shoplifting story last week. I don't think you'd heard that one before, but you know we got burgled a long time ago, nearly 18 years ago, and that it was an eye-opening experience for me, because I had until that point presumed, despite reading stories, I'd always presumed that the police would turn up with a bit between their teeth, and they would be determined to catch the scroats responsible for turning over my old house. I couldn't have been further from the truth. They were very nice and very, very thoughtful, but the prospect of them catching whoever was responsible hadn't even entered their heads. And that was 18 years ago, give or take. So before austerity and before the Conservatives got into power. So the question of how have we ended up in a place, in some ways, I can't do this on the radio because it would break about a million different rules. But in some ways, I'd like to know what it's like to be a burglar. I presume you're just laughing all the way to the, well, not the bank, obviously, but laughing all the way all the way home. Are you? That 6% figure means that it's essentially a burglar's charter. I don't fully understand why that situation has been allowed to arise. Tim's in Cheltenham. Let's hope you break the curse of the analogue phone lines, Tim. What would you like to say?
Well, ultimately, I'm flabbergasted at the continuous situation where people almost agree with police officers when police officers say, oh, it's difficult, it's a struggle, etc. Yes. Up and down the country, day in, day out, people are burgled, vans are broken into and stolen from.
Yes.
And it's not awfully difficult to track down items. Somewhere along the line...
You're moving into the space that I just tried to describe, aren't you? And we don't have a full understanding of why these figures are so low.
Indeed. From personal experience, having lawnmowers and quad bikes stolen, police turn up, offer a crime reference number, and almost basically say, "Are you satisfied with the outcome of this?" So I assume they can tick their tick box of "We've achieved this." And when you say, "Well, absolutely not," who have you been to in the local dodgy community whom all folks are aware of? Oh, that area they're notorious for. And to me, I think you
don't even need that. This fella here, they recognised his face from CCTV footage, and I've also seen quite a few stories recently about people who've got the technology on their stolen goods to tell the police where it is. And it's still not recovered, and prosecutions are still not pursued. So you don't buy the idea. And do you know what? Normally I push back. I like to defend the police in some or most circumstances, because I think their job is incredibly hard, and we'd be obviously a lot worse off without them than we are with them. But this narrative that's abroad, that, it's not their fault, and it won't be the fault of the people that turn up at your place of business, will it, Tim, or at your house? It won't be that person's fault, that person at the end of the chain of command. But somewhere in that chain of command, there's got to be someone to blame for the complete lack of appetite to investigate or solve these crimes.
It's incredibly difficult, because I would almost say, if we're not willing to blame the person that knocks on the front door for doing a awful job, then you're blaming a faceless person, and it's always easy to say, well, it's faceless Bill over there, whom
Faceless
ultimately he does nothing and causes all these problems. But I'm Little Miss Goody Two Shoes.
But you don't join the police, surely, to disappoint people like you. You join the police in the hope of catching criminals, and then something has happened in the last 20 years, which means that you might have joined the police to catch criminals, but that is not what you're going to spend most of your day doing. And yet these two people, who might be ex-coppers, they certainly work for an ex-copper, they've just got their first successful court prosecution. A burglar has been jailed as a consequence of two private citizens working for a security company investigating a crime after the local constabulary failed or declined or refused to investigate. And that, I think you would suggest, proves your point.
I would concur with that, absolutely.
I would indeed concur with it. So why? How has this happened? 12:30 is the time. John Strafford has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where this curious case of private police officers is quite exercising, isn't it? Listen, I offer you the opportunity to take a burglar to jail, take a burglar to court and almost certainly get jailed after the police have declined to investigate and you've got all the evidence there. You're going to bite my arm off. I'll say, well, that'll be £500, please. You'll say, absolutely fine, cheap at twice the price. And then I say, hang on. What impetus is there for the police to improve the service they're providing if the private sector moves into the space that they're vacating? And then the question emerges inevitably from that description, from that scenario, what has actually happened? Does Tim have a point? Have we been too nice? I don't like bashing the police as a rule, unless they've done something awful. As a kind of also it's a really silly thing to do in a lot of cases because it's woke watch territory, isn't it? It's like saying, oh, well, if the police weren't so busy dancing at Notting Hill Carnival, they'd be out solving burglaries, which is a position of such epic stupidity that I refuse to believe anyone actually means it. They're just arrogant and unpleasant enough to believe that they'll be able to persuade less educated or less informed people to believe that it's true. The same with like pride helmets or whatever it may be. So no one can realistically suggest that a few police officers temporarily boogieing at the Notting Hill Carnival is a reason for crime figures being so unattractive. But that doesn't mean the police are blameless in this. So the people that turn up at your house or your business when you get burgled, here's a question. Here it is. How much influence do they have over how that case progresses? Is it possible? Could you just get lucky? So they turn up and say, right, that's it. I'm going to get my man, like a member of the Canadian Mounted Police. I am going to get my man or woman. Or do they have absolutely no power or influence over that process whatsoever? In which case, the question of how has this been allowed to happen remains very pertinent. It just becomes even more opaque. Martin's in Hertford. Martin, what would you like to say?
Well, I would like to say this. I'm uncomfortable with a situation where people feel that they have to engage with private security to actually get the outcomes that they actually want to achieve from the police. Now, I'm a retired officer. I did 30 years, and I've worked in regulation in the police as well for a number of years. I don't know the full details of the case that you've been referring to be honest with you. But
what do you want to know?
Well, tell me about. I mean, I don't.
Oh, go on.
I would say there's 2 points. I would say.
Yeah.
Number one, you've got the attitude of the mount he gets his man type officer turning up at the street. My experience of policing has been an officer. Enthusiasm is infectious, and if an enthusiastic officer turns up, does the bits, they write up their report in an enthusiastic way with lots of detail, it gives a bit of a can-do attitude to the whole thing, and I would say that would be less likely to be screened out or put on the other pile than had someone just gone and done the basic.
So you could get lucky.
The next job.
You could get lucky.
You could get lucky and have that. But the question I would have in this is, I've just voted last week, for my Police and Crime Commissioner. Is it not the job of the Police and Crime Commissioner to be holding chief constables to account for the performance of their force to the public that they serve? They are elected.
If I answer that question, do you promise not to tell anybody what I said?
No, I'll hold your confidence.
Thank you. I'm never quite sure what they're supposed to do, the police and crime commissioners, Martin.
Absolutely nothing, because the one that we had in our area, he's just retired. It was like having a cactus plant. It might as well, I don't know what they did, but somewhere along the line there needs to be an accountability to the chief constables. Now, I have worked for the Inspectorate of Constabulary, and you'll be aware that they write reports, and some of their reports can be very, very critical.
Yes, indeed.
And in my experience, there are more critical reports coming out now for police forces than there were a few years ago. It seems to be becoming the norm that a force might be inadequate in a certain area than it was before. And it becomes almost desensitised to it. It's almost you end an avalanche of criticism. People become immune to it. It becomes the new norm.
Yes.
And that's the worry that I have with this. Why is it that police forces, I don't know why that particular burglary was screened out, if it's prosecutable, and, it clearly was.
Well, I'll tell you all the details, yeah? Well, it doesn't really matter to your point, does it? But just for people who maybe join the conversation a little late, he's got 105 previous convictions, including 33 burglaries. He broke into a Marks and Spencer's and nicked a load of meat and Prosecco, and the CCTV footage was there. He's clearly identifiable from it. The manager called the police. The police decided not to investigate. The staff from TMI, a private company, trading, I think, as My Local Bobby, they have a look at the footage. They say, we know the fella. They start sort of staking out. I can't help myself using the language of the television crime dramas. They stake out his known haunts, and they find him. And the bit that I would like to know a little bit more about is the process by which they secured full confessions from him on their body-worn cameras, and that was submitted as evidence in court, and he's now in jail.
Well, a lot of things there. I mean, it beggars belief if with the avalanche of, you can identify a suspect who's committed multitude crimes before.
Yes.
Why it was screened out. Sometimes I think the process becomes the god rather than actually,
Yes,
and the process is, well, if it doesn't tick box A, B, C, and D in the way that it comes into perhaps the control room, therefore it gets filtered out. And that there isn't really that intelligent look at the individual circumstances of it, or the common sense approach that sort of goes out the window because you're following a check.
But my inbox can fill up with stories about people turning up with a form to fill in, or so that's just the first bit of what you said. When did you leave, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I retired in 2000. Well, I retired as a serving officer in 2018, and I then went and took a job as what they call a civilian investigator, working for a county police force, working with sex offender investigation. Now, it's an interesting thing I have, and that's not quite a parallel, but I used to deal a lot with what you call these paedophile hunter gangs, who would, they'd get someone on a chat room and they'd get enough evidence to sort of arrange a meeting, then they'd surround them and then call the police. And there's always been a lot of criticism of those types of people, but they, for example, catch people who would never otherwise be caught.
Yes, they do. We used to get a couple on the programme quite regularly, actually, and it was hard to fault their contribution to the general good in that field, because, as you say,
there's a few things you tighten up on in their processes a little bit, but by and large, they're well-meaning people, highly professional as well. The evidence package that they then produce to hand over to the officer, and they are sort of taken on with great enthusiasm by the police. There's a huge, obvious, clear public risk, and they take them on. But this, I don't know, burglary, crikey, this is acquisitive crime.
Well, it's a financial crime, isn't it? So the pain of the victim is cost, not. I mean, we don't want to think about what the pain of the victim is in the other cases. But maybe we're being emotional. Maybe we shouldn't feel too differently about these two propositions, because crime is crime. Thank you, mate. I found that really helpful. The one thing I'm not clear on is what the jackpot looks like. How reasonable is it to say when you say, could you come round, I've been burgled, and Columbo turns up, like literally Columbo, and he's just not going to let it go. Just one more thing. You're going to go everywhere. It's not just going to check out, because they make it sound easy, these private officers. To be fair, if you give me a photograph of someone and a list of his known haunts, I'd back myself to catch him, although I might take a big mate with me just to keep things on the down low. But what about getting an officer who just really, really wants to solve the crime? That was the bit that baffled me all those years ago. I mean, I thought, what are you going to do? Are you going to go and hang out at the local markets, looking for the stolen goods? Are you going to knock on the doors of some known repeat offenders? No, we're just going to fill in the paperwork. The fingerprint people might come around, but it's a waste of time, to be honest with you, sir. Lovely people, But if I approached my job with the same attitude that they approached theirs, I don't think you'd be very happy. Never mind anybody else. John's in Harrow. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, John.
I just wanted to make a clear distinction between the two types of burglary you're describing, how difficult they are to solve and how that impacts sort of crime reporting statistics. In terms of the home burglary that would be part of the 200,000 that haven't been solved.
Yes.
Suspects are in and out within a couple of minutes. They know exactly what they're doing. They're very forensically aware. They are very hard to catch. And then we've got on the other side of that is the shoplifters.
Oh, so it's been an act of epic irresponsibility on my part to knit these two stories together in the way that I have.
I think so, a little bit. I
Fair
think
enough.
The shoplifting side of it is a bit of a technicality in that.
No, this was he broke in. It wasn't shoplifting. He went in through a plate glass window.
Yeah, of course. But it's first of all, it doesn't have the same impact on the victim. I know I've been to plenty of burglaries, and the victims have been absolutely mortified, and rightly so. It's a home invasion. It is an invasion of your privacy and your property. And I do still feel like this kind of shoplifting burglary, if you want to, it is burglary. It's more of a technicality in that when you commit shoplifting for the first time, the store will then ban you, and you then become a trespasser henceforward. And then when you re-enter at a later date and you commit the shoplifting, you were then a trespasser, and then you commit burglary, which obviously isn't the same thing, although...
No, but that isn't the case here. I think that's probably relevant to the discussion about whatever the figure is, the 215,000 burglaries that have gone unsolved. But in the specific example we're talking about, he broke into the shop and he was caught on CCTV.
Sure. But I think in the majority of cases we're talking about home burglaries. We're not talking about sort of very serious shoplifting.
No, but equally, they can't be that forensically aware. And even if they were forensically aware, you must know that it can't be coincidence that so many people report an attitude on the doorstep. If an officer turns up, which of course is far from guaranteed, if you haven't turned up, how do you know that they were brilliant burglars with very forensically aware? So an attitude on the doorstep that speaks to pessimism.
I think burglaries need to be attended in all circumstances. Absolutely, and I don't think private security will be able to deal with burglaries in the traditional sense.
Unless we move into a sort of two-tier universe where people with people with money can actually have a level of policing that people without money don't have. Finally, John, how likely is it, or actually scratch that, how possible is it that I could get PC Colombo coming around my house in the event of me being burgled? Someone who really, what I'm asking is, even if someone really, really wanted to go after a burglar like a rat up a drain pipe, would the strictures of the job prevent them from doing so?
I don't know. I think it's a very sticky ground. I think under law you probably could. You'd have to be very careful what you did and didn't do.
I didn't mean tactically. I just meant, would he have the time and the space and the encouragement, or would he be told, no, you can't do that. You've got to get down the co-op. Someone's just nicked some mince.
No. I think obviously a home burglary would be a priority.
Well, we shall see. It's a while since I met anyone. We've got PC Colombo here. Oh, thank God you've made it. They've got away with 2 bicycles and a laptop computer. Right. Well, I will not sleep, sir. I will not sleep until you have been reunited with your bicycles and your laptop computer. I just don't know how feasible it is to expect that level of commitment. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:01 is the time. So the conversation's moved on a little bit. The figures are chilling. 600 burglaries a day in England and Wales go unsolved. Still not entirely sure why, but it's going to have a lot to do with the fact that the bodies just aren't there. Beatrice puts it rather well. She says, of course the police are pessimistic, James, just like doctors, teachers, nurses, local council staff, etc., etc. In fact, all public sector workers who are trying to work under slashed and starved budgets by the venal Tories. That's part of it. But what does that mean on the ground? And the best way of answering that question, I think, is by telling me how possible, not even how likely or desirable, but how possible it is that when you phone in a burglary from your home or your business, you get an officer or 2 officers turning up who will go full Colombo who will not rest until they've caught the culprit. Which brings us back to the other story we're discussing today, perhaps a little unfairly. We're discussing it alongside the 600 burglaries a day in England and Wales going unsolved story. And that's the tale of the first time that we're aware of a burglar being jailed in a prosecution that was brought by a private force, a private police force. Trevor is in New Eltham. Trevor, what made you pick up the phone?
I think these private police services are a necessary evil until the police is properly resourced. The Met is suffering a chronic shortage of detectives, so they can't investigate.
Yeah, but this is like the health service, and it's going to get worse, isn't it? Yeah. Not better. If I'm a detective, I go and work for this lot.
Yep, and where they used to go into prisons and speak to people who've been arrested for burglary to help clear up crimes that they might want to admit to, that's gone. They don't do that anymore, so you don't get those clear-ups.
Okay, that's interesting.
The number of civilian staff has been slashed to the bone as well, so those statement takers, as sort of helpful investigators, people who put case papers together, they've gone, so the police officers are now having to do all that work themselves, taking time off the streets. And you've also got to look at what the service's priorities are. So if their priorities aren't burglary, then
because it's all very well pretending that someone dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival is responsible for a spike in burglary rates. But if the priority is to look into sex crimes and look into violence and then a burglary that's unfolded without any human interaction is going to slip down the list. What I sense your ex-job, are you, Trevor?
Yes, thankfully.
Yes, I can well believe that. So what today do you think is the likelihood of me getting PC or DC Colombo turning up for a burglary? So, I mean, if an officer wanted to leave no stone unturned in pursuit of the culprit, would they even be able to?
I would say no.
No, I thought you would.
They don't have the time.
Yeah.
And you've got to prioritise the threat to lives, the serious assaults, and all that sort of stuff.
And sometimes it's the threat to your own safety. I mean, it's the amount of work that would once have been done by mental health professionals that's being now done by police. That's what I mean when I said to a previous caller, I don't want to bash the police because, you're caught between a rock and a hard place. But equally, you want to know why, in the event of you reporting a crime, an air of pessimism seems to arrive at the scene, if anyone arrives at all. George is in Loughborough. George, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I'm an economist by trade, so I'm doing a PhD in economics. So I wanted to discuss the view when it comes from an economics point of view and a bit philosophical as well. So I think that this is not happening by accident.
Are we about to go Chomsky 101, George?
Not necessarily, because I've seen papers in academia discussing this from an economics point of view as well.
No, well, so have I. You mean that underfund a public service, the public gets hacked off with it, and then a government can come in and say, well, let's fix it by going private?
Not the government necessarily, but it gives the opportunity, and then the people just go with it. That's what I feel, as if there is their own idea.
I think you're right. I think it's a very well-established trope. The only thing we don't know is whether it's deliberate, or I think in the case of the health service, I would find it a lot easier to argue that it's deliberate than I would in the case of police. You mean the defunding? I can't remember exactly what Noam Chomsky said, but it was about defund and demoralise, and then the public becomes unhappy, and then power, or however you want to describe it, can get rid of what was valuable and replace it with what is profitable.
But then once you consider that they cut the police by 20,000, and then a few years later they showed up as saviors, saying that I don't know at this stage if they have hired that many police officers, but I think this is a sign that it was probably deliberate.
Okay.
Because it's still underfunded. I think they are overwhelmed. And
it's the libertarian dream, isn't it? I suppose if you can afford it, you can have it. But if you can't, you're on your own.
Yeah. And my concern as an economist is always the incentives. What incentives are they going to have? Are they going to be accountable to us after a point if the state police force is brought to its knees. And this has even happened in history before. I mean, it might have been very long ago in ancient Rome. There were like nobles who had their own army or police.
Well, it happened here.
I know this might sound extreme at this stage, but we've seen similar cases in history as well. What happens when it's instead of being accountable to our politicians and thus, by extension, they're accountable to their shareholders.
I like it. Nicely explained. Where are you from, Joe? Are you Greek? Forgive me for inquiring.
Yeah. You got it right.
I thought, well, because I love Greece, and so I often recognise the accent. And I'm trying to learn a bit more Greek on Duolingo, George.
Nice.
But guess what happened all weekend? They keep saying that they've used the word pink. I don't know why they haven't got any other colour. So this weekend I learned the phrase, the coffee, is it to café rose?
Cafés, and what's the second one?
Rose.
The second part?
The coffee is
Rose.
pink. It keeps coming up on Duolingo, the coffee and the fish. So would it be to cafés que o psaria in a rose? Ross, the coffee and the fish are pink. That's what I learned this weekend. That is never going to come in useful to me ever, is it?
I don't think so. I've never heard of it before.
I've never pink coffee. Sorry, George, you weren't expecting that. Efaristo philos mou. Kalo taxidi.
You'd be surprised what can come in handy.
The coffee is pink.
You never know.
You do.
Honestly, 25, even 30 years after I learnt,
yes.
Do you like to hunt in French? In a little pictorial thing when I was about 13, actually came in properly handy.
Okay.
In the middle of a
I shall bear that in mind.
desperately long conversational silence.
Do you like to hunt?
Yeah. I said, do you like hunting?
Yeah, very nice.
Because I saw a rifle in the corner of the room.
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's the well-known hunting fan.
And linguist.
And linguist, yes, exactly. Sheila Fogarty.
Est-ce que vous faites de la chasse, monsieur? Well, we had a long conversation then about shooting little birds in Normandy.
I was once fasting in Yugoslavia as a fellow Catholic. I was in Medjugorje.
Oh, okay.
And we fasted, and we were in a pub at midnight when the fasting ended, and I ordered what I thought was a pork sandwich in Serbo-Croat, and I was brought a bottle of schnapps.
Oh, well.
Happy days.
That's an approach to fasting, isn't
it? James O'Brien on LBC.